Welcome all of you. So we have a very, very exciting panel, and my name is Jagadish. I'm an entrepreneur myself, and currently I'm focusing more on angel kind of investments. I have about 8 to 10 companies that I'm pretty actively involved with, and most of them are in the enterprise kind of space. I did try a couple of consumer-centric companies, but none of them succeeded. And given my background of enterprise kind of companies, so primarily I focus on the areas that I can add value. So if you just look back, I came in 1982, almost like 33 years ago. I have to say, today, right now, as we see, the number of opportunities and the activities that is going on, especially in this Silicon Valley area, is absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I mean, you can take any area. You can take any area of expertise, whether it's enterprise software or mobile or data centers or consumers, right? Or connectivity, Internet of Things, and so on and so forth. I mean, everyone seems like massive, massive industries, massive opportunities, and there's tremendous room from an entrepreneurship and innovation perspective. And again, from an entrepreneur, if I put myself in your shoes, right? The kind of companies that are getting funded and the kind of valuation that some of these companies are commanding in the market is incredible. I don't think the bubble is what is causing that. I mean, there could be some elements of the bubble, perhaps maybe some of our distinguished panel members could contribute to the discussion about how much of this whole bubble phenomena is happening. But nevertheless, if somebody is solving a critical problem and he or she understands how to solve that problem and bringing that product market fit, which I think is where the biggest challenge for most of the entrepreneurs, right? And then following on the execution, right? I think if somebody knows how to do this, or somebody has done this before, or somebody has the right team that can do these things. Even today, companies can be funded, whether you are a first-time entrepreneur, whether you are a second-time entrepreneur, it doesn't matter. So the fields and the opportunities are huge. So you don't need to shy away just because you're a first-time entrepreneur. And also, by the way, there are many avenues today to raise your funds, especially in the early stages. There are many angel investors and seed investors. There are many angel forum kind of organizations that sort of give you an initial seed fund of $500,000 or $1 million. Even some of these venture capitalists as well, they have various programs like an EIR program. Or if you convince the investors, they could potentially give you a seed funding of $500,000 to $1 million. They can even syndicate and get you that initial seed funding to build your prototype, to demonstrate in the market that you have some legs with the idea that you have. So there are many such opportunities, right, from funding perspectives. You really don't need to shy away from it. I mean, especially in this particular crowd, right, with the background of an IIT and solid experience and so on and so forth. It's a lot easier for many of you guys here to raise the money and to take on the dream that you have into reality. So I think with that, what I'm going to do today, I have a bunch of questions because I put myself in entrepreneur shoes and I ask the kind of questions that entrepreneurs have. And I'm going to shoot those questions towards the distinguished panel that we have right now. But before that, I would love to basically have every one of them give a perspective of today's market and the trends that they are seeing, the areas where investments are being made by themselves and in the market, and what kind of entrepreneurs that they would love to fund. So we have Mayfield General Partner Naveen Chadha, who's very well respected, both as an entrepreneur as well as an investor, and then Shekhar Iyer, who's with VMware, SVP of Corporate Strategy, and then we have Prashant from Yahoo, and we have Josh from Greylock, right? All eminent people, all of them have operational background before they have gotten into this whole investment. I think that's what actually makes investment to be more exciting and more fun as well when you have operational background. So with this, Naveen, you want to share your thoughts on the trends and other things?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Jagdish, for the kind. For all of us. Working? Okay. So thanks a lot for the kind words to introduce all of us. Just a quick background. On Mayfield. Mayfield is an early stage venture firm with approximately $3 billion under management. We've been in business for over 45 years. We have invested in over 500 companies, of which 110 have had IPOs and another 150 been acquired. So the perspectives I'm going to share go beyond the perspectives I have had in the venture business and as an entrepreneur. I would be able to share the perspectives the whole firm has had over the last 45 years. So where are we investing today and what are the trends we are seeing? So Mayfield is primarily focused on two areas. We invest in enterprise in the whole stack, and we invest in the consumer sector. In the enterprise, what's very interesting is we take a teams-based approach, but we also take an approach of where the buyers are essentially focused. So if I start with the themes that we are investing in, they include mobile, cloud, software as a service, big data analytics, social infrastructure, software-defined infrastructure, where containers is the hot thing, and next-generation technologies for storage, networking, and security. As Jagdish mentioned earlier, what's exciting today is the buying power is shifting. The buying power is shifting. Traditionally, we used to have IT, who used to be the buyer of technology, but today what we are seeing is the rise of 4 or 5 different kinds of buyers in the enterprise. Namely, the chief marketing officer, who has huge amount of budgets to spend on technology. The CISO, the chief information security officer, has visibility to the CEO and the board level. There is evolution of what's called DevOps, and the DevOps manager has a lot of power and influence on what products eventually get bought and deployed in production. Similarly, there is the rise of the chief data officer, and they can play the roles of a data scientist, data ops, or data engineer. They have a lot of buying power and influence today. And finally, line of businesses, whether it's in sales, service, support, HR, they are spending money. So the spending is shifting from just being controlled by IT into other departments. As far as the consumer sector is concerned, and I'm sure like you'll hear more from Josh in here because he focuses on that, but as a firm where we have made investments in the consumer sector, the areas include on-demand economy, marketplaces, especially mobile, consumerization of health, social platforms, financial services, education, and Internet of Things. Similar to the IT sector, where are we seeing the buying happening in the consumer sector? So there is the Main Street consumer, that will always exist, but we are seeing 4 other buyers emerge, or 4 other kinds of users emerge, namely the millennials. They think very, very differently than some of us because they are just brought up in a different generation. Makers or influencers are extremely critical. There is the rise of the whole notion of micro-entrepreneurs. And finally, mavens or influencers are like very, very critical in the ecosystem. So those are some of the broad themes, and in follow-on questions, happy to answer any of the areas that we plan to drill into. And maybe like we can wait on the second question you had around what kind of entrepreneurs we want to fund, or let's focus on
maybe we'll get to that question.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Naveen. So my name is Shekhar Iyer. So I'm with VMware. For those of you that don't know, VMware has had a kind of a 15-year history in a space called virtualization, software technology that effectively runs data center software, making servers compute more efficiently. That's kind of where the genesis of the company started. So I'll give you both the context of what VMware does as well as where we have invested in, where we're looking to invest, as well as just in terms of trends in the industry that we see from the perspective of being in enterprise IT. So just to frame this a little bit, we don't do anything in consumers. Everything that you hear from me is probably going to be much more enterprise focused. It's also, for those of you that are familiar with the enterprise IT stack, we are more focused on the lower tiers of that stack, so a little bit more in the plumbing and a little bit less in the application. Having said that, I think we do have an interest across the board, going right from the bottom to the top. In terms of how we see technology evolving as well as where I see opportunities as we look at our investment portfolio, one is the notion of abstraction that we have both kind of helped pioneer as well as monetize is now spreading to lots of parts of technology. So the notion of being able to take something like a compute server and abstracting it out to be more efficient has now spread to the network, it's spread to the storage domain, and it's spreading right up into the application. And these are all things that lots of people are innovating around. And so for some time, in fact, as I was looking at Naveen's list, a lot of that ties into exactly the kinds of things that we look at as well across the infrastructure stack. Then I think there is the notion of convergence, which is alongside this abstraction, there is the notion of things coming together. So you now get the server come together with the storage come together with the network all in whatever, a single box, often controlled by some piece of software. And that notion is also exciting and interesting to see in different form factors, right from a small box to a very large full data center. There is the notion of what I would call as high performance type applications and workloads. So VMware, for example, has had virtualization that has tried to reach every corner of the IT stack, but there are still workloads that we go after and try to optimize for that. I mean, one of the recent things that I've taken on with the company is a focus on telcos and network functions virtualization. And this is a space where core network hardware is now getting virtualized. Probably 60 to 70% of that resembles what happens on the IT data center side, but some others are more sophisticated application requirements requiring more functionality from the underlying hypervisor. Then there are areas like, generically like security or containerization, all of which are very hot and in vogue right now. Not surprisingly because of the number of break-ins and breaches that you see, or the focus that is being put on agility in terms of getting something up and running fast. And so these are other areas that we invest in. Just as a corporate investor, our interest is right from very early stage ideas on pieces of paper to later stages of investment. We probably will be less likely to come in at just the pre-IPO phase or a mezzanine phase. And then on the other end, we are of course big acquirers. So to the extent that we've got companies that are more mature and that support what we do, and I can get into that more as we go on with the panel, but that's the other side that we see. So again, thank you for having me here, and I'm delighted to give you a little bit more input into entrepreneurship.
Thank you. So we'll have more questions. Prashant, go ahead.
Hi there. I'm Prashant Kaloria, and I'm SVP of Advertising Products at Yahoo. I've been there for a little about a year. And my perspective is a little bit different than from my colleagues on the panel, because I'm not really an investor or an acquirer in the sense. I'm a foreign guy, spent about 10 years at Google and Facebook building advertising, commerce, and business products, and then was Day02. Then Jim joined a company called Flurry, a startup called Flurry in the mobile analytics and advertising space, and came over to Yahoo as part of the acquisition. I think if I can share one perspective on the world quickly, I think it would be maybe the lens of Flurry. Flurry is a piece of software that mobile app developers use to understand who their users are, where they're coming from, and how often they use the app and do they come back, and all those things. And when we aggregate this data across a whole bunch of over 225,000 app developers and 700,000 apps, and see 2 billion devices across the world on a monthly active basis, it's a really interesting trend. Like, so for example, obviously everyone understands that mobile usage is going through the roof. Right? Last year, 2014, was the year where the time spent in minutes per day on mobile eclipsed TV for the first time. So that's obviously a big technology shift. The other thing that sometimes folks don't realize is that mobile usage is still very fragmented. Right? If you think about the desktop world, today, and this is probably even 10 years ago, if you take all the big publishers like the Google, the Facebooks, the Yahoos of the world, you can quickly get to 90-95% of all time spent on the desktop device, right? on a PC or a laptop. But in the world of mobile, it's very, very fragmented. Even today, the only company that has anything that's double-digit time spent is actually Facebook, right? And with their collection of Facebook and their Messenger, the Instagram, and so on. And even folks like Google with YouTube and so on have less than sub 10% time spent on mobile device. And as you look at the spectrum, it's actually extremely fragmented, right? And so, in one sense, it suggests a bunch of things, which is this area is obviously ripe for a number of things. Of course, if you have a great idea, you still have an opportunity to enter the space. Number one. Number two is if you're able to provide value either to app developers or to consumers as they navigate all this huge array of mobile applications, it's also like a very, very big area of value. The third thing I'll say is that as we look at mobile users throughout the day, for example, it's not that people consume all the mobile content at one time, and it's also not the case that people consume different kinds of apps at different times during the day. If you look at if you plot the mobile usage across the hours of the day, you'll find that people are playing games, for example, like pretty much all the way since they get up to the time they go to bed. And it's because people are consuming things in bite-sized chunks, right? So the other thing that's kind of interesting and maybe an area of opportunity is there's fragmentation clearly, across apps, but there's also fragmentation in your experiences from day to day, minute to minute, hour to hour. So there's some fundamental trends, right, in the way people consume information and interact and so on. And you can check out the Flurry blog. Just search it. Please on Yahoo, not on Google. The Flurry blog, and you can check out all those things. And I think that they'll give you some food for thought around the kinds of macro trends that you can look at and see if what you're doing kind of fits within those trends or not. And that might be interesting.
Thank you. Josh.
Thanks. So thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Josh Ellman. I'm a partner at Greylock Partners. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary as a venture capital firm, one of the very first venture capital firms. Started out in Boston, made the shift to Silicon Valley really over the last decade. Our current fund is $1 billion that we're investing out of, and we focus on Series A and Series B investments, very similar to what Naveen talked about with Mayfield. We focus on early entrepreneurs just starting to build their companies at the Series A and Series B level, where we really like to come in and really be part of the team and really help the companies build them. We focus on consumer and enterprise. I focus mostly on the consumer side, so what I would say about the enterprise is both of what my colleagues on the panel talked about is very consistent with where we're going, the multiple buyers in the industry. In fact, the CMO is starting to have a bigger budget than the CIO now, and so we're starting to look at a lot of technology that they're buying to better understand their customers, communicate, and everything else way beyond just the traditional deep enterprise stack, although Greylock's had a lot of success in the enterprise stack with companies like Pure Storage, with Docker, et cetera. On the consumer side, which I'll spend a little bit more time talking about, we really focus on companies that are either networks, platforms, or marketplaces. Companies that as they bring people together or bring users together or bring technology that aligns with users or other developers can become something that has a very, very durable moat and a very long-lasting network effect. We think that, as Prashant talked about, user time is getting very fragmented. People are able to access so much more. Total computing time per human being has gone up from what used to be mostly 9 to 5 when you were sitting at work and maybe an hour in the evening to almost all day long, including when you wake up in bed, you can look at a computing screen, when you're using the restroom, when you're going to bed at night, and it's nonstop. And so the accessibility of information has changed it. We're very excited about social platforms. Greylock historically was a very early investor in both LinkedIn and Facebook, which have both turned out great. And we're also investors in Instagram and Tumblr before those companies were acquired by Facebook and Yahoo respectively. And in the future we're investors in companies like Nextdoor, which we think is sort of Facebook for your neighborhood that really brings people together, as well as Medium, which is a new publishing platform started by the founder of Twitter. But as we think of all of these companies in the consumer domain in sort of the social way, we're looking for things where people come together and where the fact that there's more and more people using these platforms makes them stronger, makes them closer to daily habits, makes them things that we use in such a fundamental piece of our lives that we can then go build big businesses on top of them. And we're very patient with understanding that getting the products right and the ecosystem right and the user base right can come actually before revenue. We're used to the question about how will it make money. And in these kind of social reach platforms, we really think that understanding how it creates behavior that people do, in fragments of their day, every single day, day in, day out, week in, week out, can create something so powerful that when you have that kind of usage and engagement and monetizable behaviors, we'll be able to build a business later. Prashant and I both got to work at Facebook together, and we were just commenting on the way up here how incredible it is, the business that Facebook's been able to just continue to build on top of their platform. And we think that as you build the right companies and you build the right networks of people, you can do that. Separately, we've been very, very focused on marketplaces and other platforms. We're investors we led the Series B of Airbnb, which has just become an incredible success. And because these kind of marketplaces bring people together on both sides. You bring demand and supply. You understand that. One of my partners, Simon Rothman, he was one of the first executives at eBay. He's one of the experts on marketplaces, and he spent a lot of time educating me and the rest of the team on how to match supply and demand in a very early way and find marketplace liquidity. And we look for that in a lot of companies. And we think that kind of the service economy, the on-demand economy, as well as these collaborative consumption things like Airbnb are just, along with mobility, rapidly disrupt businesses that have traditionally had huge advantages in real estate, or by being able to hire, hordes and hordes of people. You can now have the world's largest hotel company that doesn't have a single room. And so we're looking for a lot more opportunities like that. Sprig is one of our most exciting companies up in San Francisco, and they're focused on they're kind of an on-demand restaurant. You can order food, and hot food is delivered to your house within 12 or 15 minutes. And it's the idea of the largest restaurant that doesn't actually have a place to sit. And so we're very excited about that. And then another area we've been looking at a lot is in the Internet of Things and kind of the future of hardware. For the first time ever, you can create hardware devices. It's still much harder than software, but it's definitely much less hard than it used to be. And if you can build the right devices and the right consumer brands around them, to have people attached to them looking at Fitbit or GoPro or Nest, you can start to build really important companies that then become platforms in and of themselves. And so my first investment was a company called Smart Things in that space that we ended up selling to Samsung, who was trying to become kind of a platform for the Internet of Things. And then we're looking a lot at video. For the first time kind of in the history of the mobile internet, video actually just works. The bandwidth, the LTE is now fast enough and supports high enough data rates. Our phones are fast enough and support enough for capture and storage and the ability to upload that we're seeing a massive explosion of video. We invested in a company called Meerkat, which is in the live video space. And we were actually looking at a number of other companies that do very different things for video, because we think we're just nascent for our untapping when every one of these becomes both a recorder and a broadcaster on our phones. And then the last area I'd speak about that we've been spending a lot of time is what we call the future of productivity, and this is sort of where consumer meets enterprise. But we're realizing as people are working, the 9 to 5 sitting at a desk and then going home is so rapidly changing. You need to be able to do work on your phone, be able to do work at your desk, and work at somebody else's desk. You need to be able to pick up something and make minor edits to it in the evening from your phone, from a computer. And so we're looking at a number of developers that are building really disruptive ideas around formerly desktop standalone apps to make them collaborative, networked, and really change the way that they get distributed. So we're excited about the future on all of these things, both on the consumer and enterprise, and we really try to help.
Wonderful, great. Just to get an idea from the audience, could you please raise your hand? How many of you here are entrepreneurs today? Okay. How many want to be entrepreneurs? Okay, so it's an equal mix. It's equal mix. So let me put yourself right in my shoes right now. I'm going to ask some questions to Naveen and Josh. You guys are VCs. I'm a entrepreneur, wannabe entrepreneur, trying to raise money. And this is the experience that I go through. So here I am, I have 12 years of experience at Cisco. I've got this great idea, and I get an introduction into you guys. I come with my team, my partners, I make this presentation, and you just make me come back again and again and again with more data, more questions, and it just doesn't seem to converge. Whereas my other friend, who probably had a slightly higher rank in JEE compared to me, somehow goes to some other VC and gets this term sheet within the second presentation. Now, what is the criteria that you guys have in selecting these entrepreneurs versus not selecting, and coming back and asking for more and more and more data? And when I don't have the funding, how can I get you that data, right? So I'm just curious to understand the thought process that goes behind the scenes, me as an entrepreneur pitching to you guys. Naveen.
Sure. So thanks for putting us on the spot. So I think, first of all, right, I would say venture is a very, very humbling business where you go wrong more often than you go right. For example, at Mayfield, we have 5 partners. Probably we get access to around 5,000 companies a year, and we meet 1,000 companies. And we only invest in 10. So that's 1%. So that means maybe half the companies they pass on won't go anywhere, but the other half could end up creating unicorns. So the odds of us going right are very, very low. So I can't comment about the other firms, but typically, if you are in the early stage business, at least Mayfield's philosophy is we bet on people first, market second. And this applies more to the enterprise sector. My partners who focus on the consumer are more data driven, because people go raise $500,000 to $1 million to $2 million from seed investors and can show early signs of a product market fit. So let me take the harder one, which is how do you decide to fund a paper and pencil idea in the enterprise sector where somebody wants to raise 6 to 12 million. And we have seen even fundraisers of 20 to 25 million. So I think it's just very, very hard. So at least at Mayfield, our philosophy is how do we back great people and not second guess the market, because our experience has taught us over the past 45 years that if you back A+ people, they could pick a market that doesn't pan out initially. It could be an E market or a Z market, but they will quickly pivot to figure out how to go after an A market. Now the question is, from the 1,000 guys you meet, say half of them are in enterprise, how do you pick 1% of the people? So I think this is where you rely on intuition, you rely on God that you're going to go right, you rely on your network, and you rely upon some basic instincts that you have had, right? So I would say here are the characteristics of entrepreneurs where we have gone right, and that we are trying to see and judge probably in 2 meetings or 3 meetings and make a decision, right? So the first one is, I would say the entrepreneurs who succeed have some kind of an X factor about them. They're crazy in some way. They have this ability to just walk through any wall. You throw challenges at them, they will figure out a way to get on the other side. And how do we try to assess that? We look for past successes, right? Like what have they done in their life without telling them, right? What did they do at IIT? What have they done in sports? In their own area of expertise, where do they rise, right? Like if they're a developer, where do they really stand in? So we're looking for some kind of an X factor. The second thing I would say is, these people are obsessed on the product. They will do everything to get the product market fit right. And they tend to focus on painkillers versus vitamins. Third, they have an immense ability to hire great people and surround themselves with excellence. Fourth, they are able to focus and are very nimble and can adjust to market conditions. And finally, the most important thing is, they understand that they're running a marathon, not a sprint, and are willing to take a long-term perspective. And essentially, those are some of the things in the enterprise sector we are trying to judge, because all these people who come have domain expertise, they have great degrees, they have worked at well-reputed companies. We're only going to invest in 1% of the people. So 99% of the time, you're going to say no. So our philosophy is how within a couple of meetings, just make a decision, because we have been entrepreneurs before, and it's okay, it's harsh, it's tough to say no to somebody, but it's better to do that rather than waste their time. So that's at least the philosophy we end up taking. And in the consumer sector, I would say, maybe Josh can speak more to it. With little money, people are able to make progress. You have the luxury to sit back and look for early signs of product market fit.
Josh, do you have any perspective? Yeah, so first I'd echo a lot of what Naveen said. Whenever we back a company, it's really about the people. I think people think that there's this magic process that you wake up one day and you're like, I'm going to go fundraise, and you go meet 10 venture capitalists, and you just get a term sheet out of that process. And maybe that happens 1% of the time. But in the case of all the companies, and almost all the companies that we've backed at Greylock, it's been a pattern of getting to know the founder over time. Often we have prior relationships. I used to work at LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, and met a ton of people along the way that I've interacted with, and then they're now go to start a company, and we continue that interaction. Or even in the venture world, I've met them over the course of 9 months to a year, maybe when they were raising their first seed round, or they were just leaving their job and starting to think about an idea, and they wanted to meet me and discuss their idea. And then over time, as you kind of follow along and you start to see the patterns of how they're thinking about the idea, how it's evolving, how they're dealing with obstacles, that's at the point at which they start to say, hey, I'm ready to go raise this round and really go build this thing. Are you interested then? That's when I find that the relationship and the match tends to really work, as opposed to just kind of trying to run an auction and meeting people over 2 weeks and seeing if it clicks or not. Because if you think about it, these are marathons. Like, whenever we look at joining a company, we're not trying to figure out that, hey, you have a little bit of data that I just expect that data to perfectly grow up and to the right in a very linear fashion, or even super linear fashion. We expect you to work through challenge after challenge after challenge after challenge. As things change, the world changes, the scale of your company changes. We're really looking for people who we're excited to go on that journey with. And I think the other trait that gets us most excited is people who can also work backwards a little bit, where they can paint a picture of what this world, especially in the consumer world, this crazy idea I have, but if I'm right, if this actually works, here's what the world could look like. And they kind of are able to paint this sort of narrative of this future vision of how the world could change. What happens if 300 million professionals are connected on LinkedIn? When I first met Reid Hoffman in 2003 and he painted that picture, I thought, that sounds crazy, but I'll come join you. And you look 12 years later and it's actually happened. And so that's what we're looking for in founders, who can help us work backwards a little bit from what this world could be, and then get very excited to just that we see how they just kind of tackle obstacle after obstacle and make some progress. Data is wonderful to see, and it helps us sense if there's anything that's sort of going right, but we always know that data at the early stage of any company is mostly anecdotal for the scale of what it takes to get to 100 million or 200 million users.
So let's switch gear a little bit here. Let's look at from corporate investment perspective. So again, looking at from an entrepreneur, right, and a company that is getting funding from a corporate. So some of the challenges, right, that we have seen is a corporate investor makes the investment, and then slowly over a period of time starts to push the company to develop and do the integration of their product more in line with this corporate investor, which ends up number one, consuming enormous amount of resources within the organization, and you almost reach a stage where you don't have time, you don't have the resources to focus on the external aspect of the business, right? So that gets you to a stage where you're almost being cornered, right? And you know, this corporate investor makes the move to make an acquisition of this company at a not so desirable valuation, right? So how do you envision a situation like this, and what would be your advice to the entrepreneurs to avoid situations like that? I know it's a little difficult situation for you, but I think this is something that, you know, entrepreneurs would love to get answers.
Yeah, happy to answer. I mean, if you listen to Jagdish, you won't take money from VCs, you won't take money from corporates. So, I mean, we clearly do a lot of corporate investing, relatively speaking. So in a year, we probably do about somewhere between 8 to 15 investments. And first of all, I think it's important to understand the motivation of an investment from a corporation. And I'll use a very sort of VMware-centric lens, but I'm sure it applies to about 80 to 90% of other corporate investors. Which is typically we've got three reasons why we would invest. One is it's a fairly risky bet into a space where we know very little about. I mean, as an example, IoT may be an example. I mean, we kind of are getting up to speed into what IoT is. There's a lot of sort of buzz aspect to it. Who knows what that's going to really lead to? Everybody and their brother now can kind of take their technologies and make it into an IoT technology. Is there really any opportunity there? So we might take something like that and invest in a few possible successful ventures as a learning experiment. So that's kind of one agenda. The second, I would say, which is probably the most prevalent, is in platform enhancement. And so this has a tinge of what Jagdish was referring to, which is there's clearly an infrastructure platform that we are building as VMware, and other companies build their own infrastructures. And you want that to be successful in the marketplace. And so when you want it to be successful in the marketplace, the best way is to have adoption of the platform and around the platform. So you want to kind of create an ecosystem around the platform. And in doing that, you now spread your wealth a little bit in sprouting things that somehow get either attached or enhance the value of that platform. Now, what I would say though is that it's a very generous and loose affiliation in that context, meaning we rarely would invest in a way in which we are dictating the future or the fortunes of a company. We would do it in a way in which it is mutually beneficial, where the startup understands the benefits of working with VMware in this example. Never would it be an exclusive type of relationship saying this is the only platform you can work with. On the other hand, there is going to be some sort of symbiotic expectation that you're going to help us by making our platform better, making it more prevalent in the marketplace, and likewise we are going to be able to offer you opportunities in the following way. Now, expecting it to be too rigid in either direction, I think is a flaw and never happens. Meaning, for example, for us to expect that a startup would be so beholden to us just because we put a million or two in that, just never happens. On the other hand, for a startup to expect that by giving them a million or two, they can have the entire VMware sales force going in and selling it to every customer of ours kind of day after the investment, that doesn't happen either. So it's like I said, I think you've got to be somewhat careful in your ability to pick the right corporate investment, but if you do, then it's not going to be a shackle, it's going to be much more of an accelerator. The last agenda item is certainly M&A. Having said that, it rarely is a premeditated investment objective around M&A. We will often invest in spaces where we do have a desire to make an acquisition. And the reason that we have not done the acquisition already is because either we don't feel like any company has actually shown itself to be the leader there, or because the space itself is a little bit in the making or in work in progress. And so in those instances, again, we will make investments. But once again, like I said, it's going to be no guarantee one way or the other. Just because we made an investment, there's no real guarantee that we're actually going to go acquire the company. The fact that we made an investment also doesn't shackle the company in deciding that we are only going to be acquired by us. But at the same time, there is a reasonable intent on both sides saying, look, if you guys do the right thing, sure, we have an interest in a possible acquisition down the road. So the expectation, of course, would be that as an invested company or as part of our portfolio, that you wouldn't do something completely screwy, like go and have discussions with somebody without our knowledge and then come and one fine day just tell us, hey, we're going to go get acquired by whoever, pick your favorite gamer competitor. But that's sort of the philosophy of corporate investing. So I think it could be quite valuable, which is not to say that there aren't companies that haven't had bad experiences with corporate investors, but we've got, I would say, overall a good reputation as well as good success results from our investments. We've got examples of companies that we've invested in that have got acquired with our knowledge by competitors of VMware. So that kind of shows you that it's not just a one-way street. We've got examples of companies we've invested in and acquired. We've got examples of companies we've invested in and that are either planning or going IPO. So these are all possible exit scenarios for companies. So hopefully that kind of gives you more confidence than our moderator started with.
You quickly want to add your perspective?
No, I think Shekhar gave a great answer. He's more qualified to talk about it than I am. I think the other thing, every company and every group has a track record. Right? It's not that hard to see what a company has done. Actions speak louder than words. And you can also look at the structure of the team that is working on that investment and see whether how independent are they compared to the rest of the company. Like for example, if you look at say Google and Google Ventures. Right? Google Ventures is actually fairly independent, it's almost completely independent of Google. Apart from sharing an office and obviously sort of having some folks moving over, they invest in a way that's very independent of sort of Google's own ambitions. There could be other groups that are much more tightly linked to the overall corporate development or sort of group in the company. So I think it's just a question of doing your homework and looking at the company and trying to understand what's the group that's trying to invest in and so on. And the other thing is that if you are at a point, I think the best thing is to avoid a situation altogether where you, for whatever reason, the structure of the investment or the contract is such where you have to do what someone else is telling you to do. Right? So the best thing to do in the situation is to avoid the situation altogether and not getting done.
Thank you. I have some interesting questions here. So the first one is to Josh. What are some of the emerging revenue models for social networking-based new apps? Are you seeing any type of new revenue models?
Yeah, talk about it. Prashant probably actually has as much expertise working on this within Yahoo and Flurry. We're seeing a big move towards native ads, native advertising experiences in whatever application that it is. So anytime, mobile screen is so much smaller and so much more focused on the behavior that happens there, that there's two things happening. One is the banner ad, the ability to have an ad at the top of the page or the side of the page just doesn't translate to mobile at all. So every media company, every company that has you looking at something is needing to figure out how to introduce things into that space to monetize. Instead, Facebook's obviously done this with native ads in their feed. Twitter has. Snapchat is, when you're watching a Snapchat story stream, you'll see video advertising come in there. The second wave is obviously the video. We've seen a massive shift to full page takeover in mobile advertising or video because it can actually take over the full screen for a little bit and then go back. And so anybody who's building kind of reach applications where you're getting a lot of people coming to interact with your experience, those kind of the new native model of advertising is almost required on mobile when you're in such a limited screen. And video actually just works great because again the bandwidth is there, the experience is there, and video is the best, at least brand advertising, if not direct response advertising. Video is the best brand advertising because you can create much more emotion in a short video than you can in a banner ad or something like that.
I think the addition, if you talk about building revenue stream, I think there are other ways to build revenue in an ad, in an ecosystem, which is commerce is actually going to be more significant. But I would echo Josh's point on advertising, native advertising. For example, the fastest growing part of Yahoo's business is native ads, because we'll deal the ads that can flow across. They can flow across screens and devices seamlessly, and video as well. What I would say is that one myth on ads in social networks is that they're very social. Ads in social networks are actually not that social. In other words, all the attempts by Facebook and by other folks after them to create ads where there is a lot of social activity around the ad ends up making the ad process, at least the way it goes there, too complicated and reduces the amount of demand you can put into your ad marketplace. So ultimately, native is good on display one more time, but it's a different ad format. So far, few folks have been able to scale an ad format where there's some interaction with the ad that is specific to that network. Like Facebook sponsored posts, for example, are not a great source of growth for Facebook. They never were. At the end of the day, it's an app install ad that's a regular ad with regular action. On the commerce side, the things are very interesting. I don't know, maybe you want to talk about some of the maybe companies like Poshmark that are doing very well, monetizing essentially a community and a bunch of engagement around commerce.
We have pretty much done, unfortunately. So there are some wonderful questions. So what I would recommend, given the fact that we have to wrap this up, if you guys can hang around right after this session, and those who have some questions, perhaps maybe they can outside, they can get answers to their questions. So with this, I think it was a fantastic panel, fantastic answers for all the questions and all that. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you're an entrepreneur, if you are starting a company, focus on solving the problem, focus on winning customers and generating revenues. All the rest of the things will just fall in place. That's all you need to do. Wish you all the best and enjoy the rest of the conference. Give a big hand to the panel lecturer.